On a Friday morning in October of 2019, a man entered a Citizens State Bank in Groveton, Texas, and demanded money, while implying that he had a weapon. He fled the scene in a vehicle with $7,000 in ill-gotten funds. In the meantime, police released still images from surveillance footage of the crime in hopes that members of the public would be able to identify him. One local woman recognized the suspect as her fiancé, 36-year-old Heath Bumpus. The couple was planning to marry the following day, and Bumpus had apparently robbed the bank in order to pay for the venue and his bride-to-be's wedding ring. The woman called Bumpus as he was driving down a rural road with the stolen loot and encouraged him to turn himself in. With some persuading, he surrendered to law enforcement and later gave a full confession of the crime. He had managed to make a payment on the wedding venue prior to turning himself in, but nearly all the stolen money was recovered. Instead of getting married the next day as planned, Bumpus was detained on a robbery charge. In September of 2022, nearly 3 years after the bank heist, he was convicted of the charge and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He does not appear to be in custody at this time, indicating that he was likely paroled or had his sentence shortened. Number 14. Zachary Cronin. In October of 2015, a 23-year-old Australian national named Zachary Cronin was arrested for robbing a bank in Bangkok, Thailand. He reportedly entered the building wearing a Guy Fawkes mask and brandishing a BB gun and immediately demanded money. The entire heist took just 12 seconds from start to finish, but it didn't prevent him from getting caught just moments later when he ran from the scene and was stopped by officers who were patrolling the street. He was also unaware that there was an off-duty police officer inside the bank at the time of the robbery. Cronin told the cops that he decided to rob the bank when he ran out of money after living in Bangkok's red light district for a month. He left the bank with around $5,000 in ill-gotten cash, which would have been plenty enough to buy the plane ticket home that he wanted had he not gotten caught. Following his arrest, he faced the prospect of extending his stay in Thailand by up to 10 years, which is the maximum sentence for the robbery charge he faced. He willingly reenacted the murder for police, but it's unknown whether his cooperation impacted his case in any way. When the story broke, Cronin had yet to be arraigned. Updates have not been forthcoming, leaving the outcome of his case unclear. Number 13. Gilberto Nunez. When 44-year-old Thomas Coleman Jr. failed to show up at his job as a physical therapist, one morning in late November of 2011, his wife Linda went searching for him. She found him dead in his car outside a Planet Fitness gym near his home in Ulster County, in New York's Hudson Valley. There was no obvious trauma to Coleman's body, but surveillance footage showed the dedicated family man meeting up with someone in the parking lot. During the early morning hours, it appeared as though he had purposely parked far away from the gym in anticipation of the meeting, but it wasn't immediately clear who he had met up with. Everything about the situation seemed highly unusual, including the fact that Coleman seemed healthy prior to his death. The surveillance video was grainy, but the mystery person was eventually identified as Coleman's best friend, 51-year-old Gilbert Nunez, who ran a respected dental practice in nearby Saugerties. A toxicology test dedicated a sedative called midazolam in Coleman's body, and vials of the drug were found in Nunez's office. Investigators soon learned that Nunez was having an affair with Linda Coleman at the time of his best friend's death. Thomas knew about the affair and surprisingly had tolerated it while waiting for Linda to decide who she wanted to be with, and the men reportedly continued their friendship and hung out together despite having a shared love interest and essentially being in competition with one another over the object of their affection. Suspecting that Nunez knew Linda was planning to stay with her husband, detectives theorized that he killed Coleman because he saw it as the only way to keep the relationship going. Nunez denied any involvement in Coleman's death but would have to prove it in court, where he was facing a second-degree murder charge. A jury acquitted him of murder, but found him guilty of felony forgery charges for furnishing fake CIA documents in a bizarre bid to frame Coleman for having an affair with a non-existent woman. He was also convicted of insurance fraud for overinflating the damages of an office fire and perjury for lying on a pistol permit application. The judge sentenced Nunez to 2 1/3 to 7 years in prison. He served just 19 months before being released early on New York's merit time policies toward non-violent offenders, but his request to regain his license to practice dentistry was denied. Number 12. Teron Thomas. In late September of 2024, the murdered body of 69-year-old therapist William Nicholas Abraham was found wrapped in a tarp and dumped alongside a highway in East Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He had been bludgeoned to death. The following day, police pulled over 20-year-old TikTok star Teron Thomas, who was reportedly driving Abraham's car. According to law enforcement, he tried to flee during the traffic stop. He ended up crashing the vehicle and now stands accused of second-degree murder and obstruction of justice. During a search of Thomas's apartment, investigators found blood matching Abraham's DNA and multiple sharp instruments that they believe were used in the murder. On the day before the crime, surveillance footage appeared to show Abraham entering the apartment in the same outfit he was found dead in the following day. Hours later, Thomas was seen dragging a large object wrapped in tarp to Abraham's vehicle. He was clearly struggling with the item. It's unclear how the two men knew each other, but according to authorities, there is no evidence that Thomas was a client of Abraham's. His alleged motive for the crime remains unclear. Until recently, Thomas, known by his moniker Mr. Prada 456, was popular among his millions of followers for his comedic and relatable videos about friendships and relationships. Whether he'll ever go back to TikToking or if his social media career is over remains to be seen. Number 11. Amalia Helton. One Michigan family's financial strife became so dire that its matriarch, 45-year-old stay-at-home mom, Amalia Helton, apparently felt that she had no choice other than to rob banks in order to make ends meet. She was accused of committing at least 4 bank robberies in Wyandotte, Allen Park, and Southgate between November of 2018 and June of 2019, leading to criminal charges in connection with 2 of the robberies. Helton allegedly committed the first bank heist 2 days after Thanksgiving, when she was finally caught by a specialized police task force. Law enforcement discovered a stolen license plate on her minivan. She reportedly admitted to at least some of her crimes, telling police that she acted out of financial desperation. Amalia's husband, Philip Helton, blamed himself during an interview with 7 Action News, mentioning that he felt like it was his fault that the family's finances were in bad shape. He declined to go into further detail. While the outcome of Helton's case is unclear, records show that she is not currently in custody, indicating that she squared her criminal matters away. Number 10. Nicholas Michael Bust. In late July of 2024, police in Denver, Colorado responded to a 911 call from 44-year-old college professor Nicholas Michael Bust, who claimed that he had found his wife, 44-year-old Seorin Kim, bleeding, and his daughter, Leslie Kim, not breathing. Seorin died from blunt force injuries after being taken to the hospital, and Leslie also passed away. The cause and manner of her death have yet to be revealed. Michael Bust quickly landed at the top of the suspect list. His knuckles and neck were visibly injured, and his wife's wounds were inconsistent with a death not involving foul play. Michael Bust was subsequently charged with his wife's murder and tampering with evidence, but the details of the crime have been scarce thus far. His alleged motive and the circumstances leading up to the victims' deaths are unclear. Prior to his arrest, Michael Bust was an esteemed professor of the English department at Regis University. He now remains in custody at the Denver County Jail, with bail set at $5 million. The outcome of the case and whether he'll face charges in connection with Leslie's death remain to be seen. Number 9. Lawrence Ripple. Desperate to get away from his wife, 70-year-old Lawrence Ripple entered a Bank of Labor branch in Kansas City, Kansas, in September of 2016 and handed the teller a note demanding money and stating that he had a gun. Instead of fleeing with the $3,000 in cash that the teller handed him, he waited in the bank's lobby for the police to arrive. According to news reports, Ripple had written the demand note at home during an argument with his wife, telling her he would rather be in a jail cell than at home. Up until that point, he had lived a respectable and law-abiding life. Following his arrest, Ripple's attorney argued that he had suffered from untreated depression ever since undergoing heart surgery 2 years earlier. In early 2017, Ripple pleaded guilty. Under local law, he could have faced more than 3 years in prison. In a rare example of forgiveness, the judge sentenced him to 6 months of house arrest, sparing him from any time behind bars. The decision was made with the support of the bank's vice president and with Ripple's mental health taken into consideration. During his sentencing hearing, Ripple's attorney explained that his client had sought mental help following his arrest and that he was now doing much better. In addition to the house arrest, Ripple was ordered to perform 50 hours of community service and pay a few $100s in fees and donations. Number 8. Michael Terry Nin. In late August of 2023, a Florida man who had fallen on hard times decided that robbing a bank would help solve his problems. 67-year-old Michael Terry Nin entered a Bank of America branch in Hollywood and waited in line. He then approached the teller and slid a brown paper bag under the counter while telling the employee he had a gun and to put all the money in the bag. The teller refused, prompting Nin to repeat the demand. She and the other 2 tellers proceeded to lock their drawers while one of them activated the bank's silent alarm. Realizing he wasn't going to get any money, he left empty-handed and went back to the halfway house where he was living at the time. One of his housemates recognized him in surveillance still images that police released to the public following the robbery. The police were called and officers interviewed Nin, who admitted to the crime and explained that he committed the botched heist because he imminently needed to obtain $650 in order to pay his rent and avoid homelessness. He was arrested on a federal bank robbery charge, but updates on the case have not been forthcoming, leaving the outcome unclear. Number 7. Clinton Neal Walker. In 2018, 35-year-old Clinton Neal Walker was fired from his job as a firefighter in Hillsborough County due to his alleged unwavering loyalty to the Outlaws motorcycle gang. He was the first firefighter employed by the county to fall under investigation for suspected gang ties, and the local chapter of the International Association of Firefighters fought for a year in an attempt to help him keep his job, but their efforts were unsuccessful after a judge took Walker's lengthy disciplinary record and the findings of the investigation into account. In her ruling, arbitrator Charlotte Gold wrote that Walker and other employees had attended motorcycle club events, but she noted that Walker's behavior in particular affected the county's reputation and good standing. Walker claimed he had left the Outlaws in 2016 prior to the issuing of a directive banning county employees from being members of gangs. But it was him and a few others who reportedly inspired the ban, which came 2 months after he was arrested in Key West for starting a bar fight involving at least 15 other outlaws and which left at least 2 employees injured. The report also found that Walker had been recruited into the Outlaws during the early 2000s by his former supervisor, who was also involved in violent and unbecoming situations that the fire department has since made efforts to distance itself from. Needless to say, he didn't get his job back, giving him no choice but to seek employment elsewhere. Number 6. Ahmed McDow. 20-year-old Cesar Peralta was fatally shot in the parking lot of a Houston apartment complex in late July of 2024. By the time Harris County deputies arrived at the scene, the shooter had fled on foot. Peralta was pronounced dead at the scene. In early August, 21-year-old actor Ahmed McDow was booked into custody on suspicion of Peralta's murder. Best known for his role on the HBO series Billions, McDowell has also appeared in the Astronaut Wives Club and the Oprah Winfrey Network series David Makes Man. For now, he remains at the Harris County Jail with bail set at $400,000. The details surrounding Peralta's murder, including the circumstances leading up to it, and McDowell's alleged motive have yet to be revealed. Number 5. Candace Rivera. 37-year-old activist Candace Rivera, also known as Candace Leard, founded an anti-human trafficking non-profit based in Lehi, Utah called Exodus. In 2024, she was charged with 31 felonies relating to alleged fraud and other financial crimes. Prosecutors are accusing her of embezzling tens of thousands of dollars that her organization received from donors for the purpose of combating human trafficking and using the money for herself. Rivera also allegedly posed as a nurse and a United Nations employee. Matt Johnson, an Exodus employee of 4 years, told local station KUTV that he disagreed with how certain aspects of the organization were being run. He claimed that he only received lies from Rivera and said that he planned to watch as the situation unfolds. Johnson also emphasized the importance of carrying on the non-profit's work in the fight to end human trafficking. When the judge asked Rivera about her finances during her arraignment, she said that she no longer had access to her charity's money or her own assets due to the nature of the allegations she faced. The judge granted her request for a public defender but denied bail, ordering her to remain behind bars until the conclusion of her case. In August of 2024, Rivera pleaded no contest to several charges while others were dismissed with prejudice, which means that prosecutors cannot reinstate those particular charges. She is currently awaiting sentencing. Number 4. Kendra Long. Police in Henderson, Nevada, were responding to a call at a local residence in July of 2022 when they were met at the door by a young, sobbing boy who immediately handed them a Ziploc bag filled with methamphetamine. He told the officers that he discovered it by accident after seeing a few bags beneath his mother's nightstand and becoming curious about what they contained. When he got a closer look, he instantly knew what it was because it was something he had seen before. The boy called his father, who called the police, and locked himself in the bathroom for over an hour until officers arrived. After listening to his story, the responding officers confronted his mother, Kendra Long, with the bag of drugs in hand. Long denied knowing what was in the bag, which contained far more than what's considered to be a personal amount of the drug. In fact, the police told Long that she was in possession of enough methamphetamine to provide for hundreds of people. She continued to act like she knew nothing about the drugs, suggesting that they could belong to her boyfriend, who she didn't know very well, and that her ex-husband might have placed them in the house. The cops arrested Long on suspicion of child abuse and drug dealing, and further investigation reportedly revealed that Long was, in fact, selling illicit substances. During the brief time that she spent in custody, her son was cared for by his father, Anthony Cruz, who later told 8 News Now that he thought Long had finally gotten caught doing something that he had insisted had been going on for a very long time. He was shocked when she was not only released from custody, but placed on probation in lieu of a custodial sentence. Under the terms of Long's supervision, she risked a prison sentence if she violated probation, but she was never actually sent to prison despite being accused of violating several times. She was even caught with drugs again, but managed to avoid incarceration or any serious felony convictions. While Cruz thinks the law went too easy on Long and that the system failed his family, he managed to gain sole custody of he and Long's son while she sorts her life out. Number 3. Sally Haiz. Among the problems that have plagued the Middle East in recent years is a full-blown economic crisis in Lebanon, where 80% of its population has plunged below the poverty line. Many people have been left hungry and desperate for even slight relief, and things have gotten so bad that some banks reportedly blocked customers from accessing their own money. Determined to get her hands on her $13,000 of savings, a woman named Sally Haiz and some accomplices held up a bank in Beirut. In late 2022, she briefly took everyone inside the bank hostage with what she later claimed was a toy gun, then bolted from the scene with her money. Around the same time, a man carried out a similar hold-up in the mountain city of Alais before surrendering to authorities. A month earlier, a different man was relegated to demanding his own money at gunpoint so he could afford his sick father's medical treatment. Before going into hiding, Haiz claimed that she executed the heist for a similar reason, to pay for medical care for her sister who has cancer. She told reporters that she had tried to withdraw money 2 days earlier. After several weeks on the run, Haiz surrendered to law enforcement. She was released on bail and hit with a 6-month travel ban while her case proceeded in court. Today's topic was requested by Phantom Scorpio 2008 and Link 720. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. John Mark Dugan. 51-year-old John Mark Dugan was once a sheriff's deputy in Palm Beach County, Florida. He now lives in Moscow, where he's been granted political asylum and where his new apparent purpose is to serve as a propaganda machine for the Kremlin. Dugan reportedly runs a network of more than 160 bogus websites that exist specifically to spread political misinformation among Americans. The sites are designed to resemble the types of news websites that people in the US, Britain, and France read. They tend to contain a number of factual articles with completely non-factual pieces peppered in, making it difficult for some readers to distinguish between fact and fiction, while others simply believe what they read without considering the possibility that it might be untrue. One of the more outrageous articles accused Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky of being a cocaine smuggler. Another one of the sham newspapers claimed that the CIA was in cahoots with Russian President Vladimir Putin in an effort to undermine Trump's presidential campaign. These articles have been seen by tens of millions of people and are actively shared on social media by thousands. They've also been published in as many as 16 languages. According to investigative journalists, the articles are created with the help of artificial intelligence, enabling Dugan to accomplish as much damage as a single person as an entire group of Russian trolls caused in anticipation of the 2016 presidential election. When confronted by journalists, Dugan denied owning the websites, but the evidence reportedly points to the contrary. At least one friend of Dugan's has said that he privately took credit for the website's existence, and IP addresses have pointed toward a connection between the sites and Dugan's likely ownership. While working for various law enforcement agencies in the US, Dugan was accused of harassment and excessive force, landing several of his employers at the center of expensive civil lawsuits. In Florida, there's a warrant out for his arrest on 21 felonies, including extortion and wiretapping. It's unclear exactly when Dugan went rogue, but it's evident that it started happening before he left the United States. Dugan fled America in 2016 and now seems to feel untouchable, so much so that he has even admitted to impersonating an FBI agent in a phone call with journalist Stephen Brill, who is dedicated to exposing his shady activities. He's now a Russian citizen, which means it's unlikely that he'll ever land in US custody. In the meantime, those who have caught on to his antics are starting to form a unified effort to combat his deliberate spread of fake news. If you think an ordinary Joe's life can take a turn for the worse in an instant, then stay tuned till after number 1, because we've got our previous release of When Sons Go Wrong right up. Number 1. John Coughlin. After losing his job as an executive of the Hertz rental car agency at the age of 50 in 2013, John Coughlin of Enfield, Connecticut, resorted to robbing banks instead of looking for another job. According to authorities, he committed at least 4 bank heists throughout Massachusetts in 2014, including Greenfield, Palmer, Worcester, and Sturbridge. He used the same MO for each robbery, handing the teller a note that stated, "I have a gun, and if there are no games, no one gets hurt." Coughlin was caught by police in September of that year during a traffic stop shortly after his latest robbery. His hands were covered in red ink from an explosive dye pack that had been slipped in with the cash he stole, and he only profited to the tune of around $5,000 per robbery, but had kept doing it, apparently feeling that the risks were worth the reward. Within an hour of his arrest, Coughlin confessed to his crimes. Federal authorities charged him with robbery by violence or force, and he was also charged in various local jurisdictions. Up to that point, he had only ever been charged with a traffic violation. He was convicted of the federal charges and sentenced to 4 years in prison. During Coughlin's sentencing hearing, he talked about how he had lost his career and marriage at the same time, and that his losses were compounded by the ailing state of the economy, triggering him to react irrationally. His attorney told the court that their client was at a loss to explain what brought him to this inglorious end. After a lifetime of having respectable values and a strong work ethic, Coughlin had even shown an effort to improve his circumstances while out on bail, leading to his conviction and sentencing. He had found a job and wanted to continue working so he could pay restitution, but the prosecution was unwilling to overlook his decision to use his personal issues as an excuse to commit a crime, and the judge seemed to agree. 36-year-old Joshua Lee Webb decapitated his mother, Tina Marie, on May the 14th of 2017, before stepping into a supermarket in Clackamas County, Oregon, with the severed head in hand and stabbing a clerk. Webb, who suffered from severe vision problems and lived with his parents at the family's rural home, murdered the 59-year-old woman on Mother's Day. For reasons unknown, following the matricide, he wandered into Estacada Harvest Market and stabbed Michael Wagner, one of the store's employees. Wagner, who was 66, survived the attack, in large part due to the assistance of his co-workers who estranged Webb until police arrived. The victim was taken to the hospital where he was treated for his wounds. Meanwhile, Webb's sister frantically called 911 as she discovered her mother's body, along with the remains of her brother's dog. Webb's father, David, had been away from the house at the time of the killing. The suspect was examined by 2 psychiatrists after his arrest and was diagnosed with both schizophrenia and psychosis. Although he began taking medication following the diagnosis, he still reported hearing voices in his head a year after the attacks. Webb was found guilty by reason of insanity on June the 26th of 2018 and was committed to a mental hospital. Under Oregon law, he would be evaluated every 2 years by the Psychiatry Review Board to determine if and when he would be released. Relatives of both victims expressed their dissatisfaction with the sentence. Number 16. Andrew Wilson. 19-year-old Andrew Wilson, a resident of Williamston, Michigan, murdered his mother, Lisa, on September the 8th of 2017 after she forbade him from keeping a puppy. The victim, aged 51, had reportedly argued with her son after he attempted to adopt a dog. Wilson subsequently waited until his mother went to bed to shoot her in the back of the head as she slept. He called 911 at 7 o'clock the following morning, claiming he'd returned home to find his mother already dead. When police arrived at the scene, however, they made the determination that nobody other than Wilson and his mother had been inside the house that night. Detectives eventually discovered that the murder weapon had been the family's .22 Magnum rifle, which was kept in a locked cabinet. Wilson was believed to have driven around the neighborhood and discarded the weapon before calling 911. His diagnosis of major depressive disorder during the ensuing trial was instrumental in reducing his charges from first-degree to second-degree murder. Judge Clinton Canaday III ultimately sentenced him to between 17 and 24 years in prison following his conviction. Number 15. Brian Peck. On October the 17th of 2017, days after 76-year-old Gail Peck was reported missing, her son Brian was arrested for murdering her. The 55-year-old Illinois man initially told police his mother had gone out for a walk with her dog. Although the animal managed to find its way back home on its own, Gail never returned. Police discovered the elderly woman's remains in a duffel bag. With the help of a community emergency response team, Brian became the investigation's prime suspect when traces of blood were found at the Peck family's residence, and footage recovered from a Home Depot showed him purchasing tarps, nylon cord, and paver bricks. He also bought a duffel bag and steam cleaner at Walmart the following day, paying for his purchases with $4,000 he'd transferred from his mother's checking account. The man was believed to have dismembered his mother and disposed of her body in a lagoon. He was arrested and charged with premeditated murder, as well as concealment of a homicidal death. Brian admitted to killing his mother but claimed he'd acted in self-defense. According to his testimony, they'd had an argument over the volume at which he played his music. The dispute eventually escalated after Gail demanded her son move out, at which point she allegedly grabbed a knife to attack him. The prosecution rejected Brian's version of events, contending he'd acted with premeditation. In 2022, he was sentenced to 62 years in prison. Number 14. Stephen Pratt. 2 days after being released from prison and returning home to Atlantic City, New Jersey, Stephen Pratt murdered his mother, 64-year-old Gwendolyn Pratt, on October the 12th of 2014. The 45-year-old man had been incarcerated since 1986 when he was found guilty of fatally shooting his neighbor, Michael Anderson, at the age of 15. Though Pratt's family had just thrown him a welcome party, he contacted one of his cousins to ask whether he could stay at their house over the weekend, indicating he'd had an argument with his mother. When law enforcement caught wind of what Pratt had done and went to arrest him, he didn't resist. He decided to plead guilty during his first court hearing, stating he didn't want the case to go to trial. In the end, Pratt was sentenced to 25 years behind bars for the murder. Number 13. Jeffrey Jordan. 32-year-old Jeffrey Jordan, the son of basketball icon Michael Jordan, was taken to the hospital on September the 20th of 2021 after slipping and hitting his head against a table at Casa Amigos, a bar in Scottsdale, Arizona. Upon arrival at the hospital, Jordan began exhibiting hostility towards the medical staff and even assaulted some of the employees. Although the specific circumstances of the attack weren't disclosed to the public, the incident made national headlines, in no small part due to his father's prodigious fame. The young man, who played college basketball at the University of Illinois and later at the University of Central Florida, but never made it to the pros, was charged with 1 count of aggravated assault against healthcare professionals following his subsequent arrest. Number 12. Elijah D. Smith. On September the 18th of 2021, Elijah D. Smith gunned down his mother, singer LaToya Acree, in the driveway of her home in Spotsylvania, Virginia. 41-year-old Acree, who was preparing to perform at an event to raise awareness for domestic violence, ultimately succumbed to a gunshot wound to her upper body. Mother and son had reportedly been arguing leading up to the attack. After shooting his mother, 21-year-old Smith fled the scene. He was found at a motel by police and was arrested on charges of second-degree murder. The culprit had been out on bond awaiting criminal proceedings for a separate incident, for which he'd been charged with assault and battery. Smith was found guilty in January of 2023, and although he hadn't been sentenced yet, as of the latest updates, he faced up to 43 years behind bars as potential punishment. Number 11. Gregory Logan Ramos. Florida student Gregory Logan Ramos fatally strangled his mother, 45-year-old Gail Elaine Clevenger, on November the 2nd of 2018. The young man then reportedly hid her body outside a DeBarry church. 2 of the underage criminal's friends were charged with accessories after the fact as well. Ramos had argued with his mother over a bad grade at school, leading to a violent altercation that culminated in Clevenger's death. Initially, Ramos called 911 and reported that someone had broken into their house and committed the murder while he was at school. Detectives, however, grew suspicious of the young man after noticing scratches on his face. Ramos provided conflicting accounts about how he'd been injured, telling his father he'd fallen down a flight of stairs, while claiming to have gotten into a fight at school when questioned by police. He eventually admitted to the murder and to burying his mother's remains by the River City Church's fire pit, with the help of 20-year-old Brian Porras and Dylan Keglarik, aged 19. Each of the suspects was ultimately tried as an adult. Ramos pleaded guilty on December the 9th of 2020 in order to avoid a life sentence. Instead, he was sentenced to 45 years and could be paroled after 25. Number 10. Brian Spence. Shortly before 9 a.m. on March the 2nd of 2020, police were called to the scene of an abandoned car near Jenks East Elementary School in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Upon arrival, law enforcement found rifles inside the vehicle, as well as documents containing the address of a home near East 88th Street and Braden Avenue. Officers went to the house, which was found to be emanating the strong odor of gas. The authorities subsequently evacuated nearby homes as firefighters and a hazmat crew geared up to make entry. After doing so, emergency personnel came upon the lifeless bodies of Beverly and Joseph Spence, both of whom had sustained fatal gunshot wounds. Following further investigation, the slain couple's adult son, Brian, was identified as a suspect. Investigators uncovered that the 40-year-old had deleted text conversations with his father about delinquent debts. Brian reportedly owed Joseph roughly $17,000, a fact he later admitted to the police. He likewise confessed to gunning down his parents, then leaving their home's natural gas on in the hopes of an explosion, which he thought would eliminate his financial troubles. Brian was booked into the Tulsa County Jail on 2 counts of first-degree murder, to which he ultimately pleaded guilty. In November of 2020, the man was sentenced to a pair of consecutive life terms. Number 9. Stephen Burks. 27-year-old Stephen Burks severely injured his mother, Karen Jeffley, and murdered her fiancé on January the 6th of 2023 at the home they shared in Houston, Texas. Burks reportedly shot the couple following a heated argument. When police arrived at the scene, they encountered the suspect, who was still armed with a gun. Jeffley was rushed to the hospital where she was treated for her injuries, though, as of the latest developments, her condition remained delicate. Her fiancé was declared dead at the scene. Burks was charged with aggravated assault and murder. His bond was set at $1 million, and, if released, he would remain under house arrest while awaiting the case's legal proceedings. Number 8. Kit Darren. Miami high schooler Kit Darren ultimately admitted to murdering his mother, 35-year-old Renette Emile, on March the 27th of 2012. According to subsequent reports on the matter, the young man had even hosted a party at the family home while her remains were still inside. Darren strangled his mother after a heated argument before stabbing her over 100 times with a butcher knife. Following the murder, he covered Emile's body with sheets and laundry detergent and invited friends for a get-together at their residence. Darren had been suffering from psychological issues, which had resulted in other concerning incidents leading up to his mother's killing. During one such episode, he reportedly jumped out of a moving car, then proceeded to rush directly into traffic. Darren lived with his mother's corpse for several days before police arrived at the apartment, responding to a call placed by Emile's boyfriend, who'd grown worried after not hearing from her. In 2015, the young man was sentenced to 28 years in prison for the murder. Number 7. Daniel Petrich. Ohio teen Daniel Petrich led a fairly average adolescent life until he contracted a staph infection from a skiing injury, which rendered him housebound for a year while he recovered from acute spinal damage. During that time, his friend Jonathan Johnson introduced him to the Halo video games, and he subsequently developed an addiction to playing them. Reports described Daniel playing the game for upwards of 8 hours every day at Johnson's house. Daniel reportedly wanted to purchase a copy of the game for himself, but his father, Mark, disapproved of its depiction of violence and therefore forbade him from playing it ever again. The teen flouted his father's orders and tried to smuggle a copy of Halo 3 into the family's Wellington home. Mark caught him, however, and confiscated the game, placing it in a safe that also contained a 9mm handgun. On October the 20th of 2007, roughly a week after the video game was locked away, Daniel went rummaging through his father's things and eventually unearthed the key to the safe. He extracted both the game and the firearm, then proceeded to shoot both his parents as they sat on the couch in the living room. Daniel's mother, Susan, succumbed to the gunshot wounds she sustained to the head, chest, and arms. Daniel then placed the gun in his critically injured father's hands to make it appear as though he'd actually committed the shooting. Minutes later, Daniel's sister Heidi and her husband Andrew arrived at the home 2 hours earlier than they'd planned, causing the teen to panic. He initially refused to open the door, but when Heidi heard one of her parents groaning, she and Andrew forced their way inside. Daniel subsequently fled in the family van but was pulled over and arrested while en route to a friend's house. Mark ultimately survived, so his son faced charges of aggravated murder and attempted aggravated murder. In court, the prosecution tried portraying the teen as a heartless killer who'd meticulously planned his parents' killings in retaliation for having his copy of Halo 3 taken away. While being psychologically evaluated, Daniel admitted to plotting the murder over the course of the week that preceded it. Daniel's legal team, meanwhile, attempted to argue the insanity defense, claiming the young man had been under considerable stress due to the skiing injury, which in turn made him susceptible to being influenced by video game violence. In the end, Daniel was found guilty of his charges and was consequently sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Number 6. Aaron Matthew. On September the 11th of 2021, 54-year-old Ingrid Matthew was murdered by her teenage son Aaron at her home in Leicester, East Midlands, England. Aaron, who was 19 at the time, stabbed his mother repeatedly before slitting her throat and fleeing the scene. She died from massive blood loss while lying on her bedroom floor, where she was discovered by her former partner and Aaron's father, Andrew Marshall. The young man surrendered himself to the police the morning after the incident, whereupon he was charged with first-degree murder. During the criminal trial, the defense team argued that doctors had failed to diagnose Aaron with autistic spectrum disorder, which allegedly prevented him from controlling his impulses. The young man pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He was sentenced to life in prison, although he could be paroled after serving a minimum of just 6 years. Number 5. Jack Din. On the morning of December the 23rd of 2022, 54-year-old Ty Din was found dead at his home on the 1200 block of Snyder Avenue in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Local police revealed that the man's body had been stuffed inside a freezer in the basement of the residence with a bag over his head. As the homicide investigation got underway, detectives spoke with a neighbor who happened to be walking their dog. Early on the morning, Ty's body was found. The witness reported hearing a horrifying cry for help from inside the Din household. Some of Ty's relatives subsequently conducted a welfare check on him, whereupon they came across blood and a knife and notified the authorities. In early January of 2023, it was reported that the police had identified a suspect in the case, the victim's 27-year-old son, Jack. The latter was taken into custody and charged with murder, possessing instruments of crime, and abuse of a corpse as he awaited the next steps of the case's legal proceedings. Number 4. Track Palin. The son of former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin was arrested on domestic violence charges in September of 2018. According to the police, 29-year-old Track Palin was involved in a physical altercation with a female acquaintance at his home in Wasilla, Alaska. State troopers arrived at the house at about 10:37 p.m. after receiving a report about a disturbance. It emerged that Track had taken away the alleged victim's cell phone in order to prevent her from calling the police. He then physically resisted the officers as they attempted to handcuff him. He was held at the Matsu pretrial facility in Palmer without bond on charges of domestic violence, interfering with a report of domestic violence, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. The incident occurred on the heels of another domestic episode at the Palin family residence in December of 2017. Track had reportedly gotten into a heated confrontation with his father, Todd, after breaking into his parents' house over a dispute about a pickup truck. Todd, who'd armed himself with a gun in anticipation of his son's arrival, was tackled to the ground and repeatedly punched in the head before ultimately escaping. At the time, Track was on probation for a previous domestic violence arrest stemming from an incident with his then-girlfriend in January of 2016. For the attack on his father, he pleaded guilty to first-degree criminal trespass, avoiding an assault charge and a potential 1-year jail sentence in exchange for attending an intense therapeutic program offered to U.S. veterans. As a result of his most recent arrest, however, Track became ineligible for the program and was instead ordered to spend a year in custody, either at a halfway house or in jail. Number 3. Sandy Lewis's son. On November the 20th of 2014, Sandy Lewis's husband received a call from their 24-year-old son, informing him he'd murdered the 53-year-old woman at their Detroit residence. The father immediately called 911 before rushing to the house where his son was waiting. Inside, he found his wife's body on the kitchen floor with multiple stab wounds. He restrained his son until police arrived and took him into custody. The young man, whose name wasn't released to the media, was taken to the hospital, where he was treated for a deep laceration. Although the reason for the murder remained undetermined, police theorized Lewis's son had stabbed her as a result of an argument and an unspecified mental illness. Number 2. Henri Van Breer. In January of 2015, a wealthy South African family was brutally attacked at their luxury villa on the Desalza Winelands Golf Estate at Stellenbosch. The assault occurred during the early morning hours of the 27th and ultimately claimed the lives of millionaire property developer Martin Van Breer, his wife, former IBM computer scientist Teresa, and their eldest son Rudy. The couple's daughter Marley survived but was left in a coma as a result of her near-deadly injuries and underwent several months of intensive physiotherapy in the aftermath. The Van Breer's younger son, Henri only suffered minor superficial wounds. As was detailed in subsequent reports, the assailant had been armed with an axe during the course of the attack and had inflicted at least 17 wounds to the victims' skulls and necks. While being interviewed by the police, Henri indicated he'd sustained his relatively light injuries during a life or death struggle with the purported attacker, whom he described as a masked intruder. As the investigation progressed, however, suspicions began to fall upon Henri, the only Van Breer who hadn't been killed or critically injured that fateful night. One of the initial red flags was the fact that multiple hours had passed following the supposed home invasion before he contacted the authorities. Furthermore, there were no signs of an intruder at the estate, which was outfitted with perimeter electric fencing and security gates, as well as CCTV and 24-hour dog patrols. The affluent family's villa exhibited no evidence of forced entry, and nothing had been stolen. Henri maintained his innocence while rumors began to circulate about a feud that had begun to burgeon between him and his parents in the period leading up to their deaths. The young man had allegedly developed an addiction to drugs, and his parents eventually cut him off from the allowance they'd previously paid him. After a year and a half of uncertainty, law enforcement finally gathered enough evidence to arrest Henri for the triple homicide of his parents and brother, as well as the vicious attack on his sister. In April of 2017, the case's legal proceedings commenced at Western Cape High Court, with him entering a plea of not guilty. The following May, however, Henri was convicted of murder, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. He was given 3 consecutive life prison terms, plus an additional 16 years. As a consequence of his incarceration, Henri missed out on the multi-million-dollar inheritance that had served as his primary motive in the first place. The estate was instead inherited in full by Marley, the sole survivor of her brother's attack. Number 1. William Josephus Warden. On November the 3rd of 2018, only a week after the devastating Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, a young man from Cary, North Carolina made threats against a local synagogue. William Josephus Warden, the son of prominent former Court of Appeals Judge Lucy Inman, reportedly rang the door at congregation Sha'ari Shalom and made hostile remarks towards the individual who answered. In addition to issuing threats, Warden made a number of disparaging statements against the Jewish religion and people of the Jewish faith. It was revealed that the young man had also distributed anti-Semitic literature, which included a swastika in the words Aryan Youth, in the area of Roblin Lane in Cary. The paper flyers he handed out reportedly featured a link to a SoundCloud channel containing numerous songs bearing titles which suggested a strong anti-Semitic and anti-African ideology. Furthermore, Warden was accused of erecting a cross at Bond Park in Cary, which he then set ablaze. In January of 2020, then 21-year-old Warden pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of ethnic intimidation. He was told to abide by the terms of his unsupervised probation for a period of a year, during which time he was ordered to attend a psychiatric treatment program in Florida. Thanks for watching. If you could travel back in time, would you rather spend a day with Pablo Escobar or with Jack the Ripper, and why? Let us know in the comments section below.